The sound of the slap echoed through the hospital corridor. The entire floor went silent. A stainless steel mop bucket tipped onto its side, sending water rolling across the polished white tiles. A ring of keys skidded away and stopped at the polished shoes of the hospital board members who had just stepped out of the executive elevator. No one moved. The elderly janitor stood perfectly still, one hand resting on the mop handle. A bright red mark spread slowly across his cheek where the young nurse had struck him. "You belong on the floor," she said, loud enough for every patient, doctor, and visitor to hear. "Maybe now you'll remember your place." Several nurses lowered their eyes. A resident doctor took one step forward, then stopped. No one wanted to get involved. The old man simply looked at the water spreading across the hallway. Without anger, without embarrassment, he bent down to pick up his bucket. Then the chairman of the hospital board spoke. His voice was calm. "So, this is how you treat the owner." The nurse's smile disappeared. Her face turned pale before she even understood what those words meant. And in that single moment, the entire hospital realized they had never known who the quiet old janitor really was. 5 months earlier, at exactly 5:30 every morning, before the first surgeon reviewed a patient's chart and before the first ambulance pulled into the emergency entrance, one man had already walked every hallway in the hospital. His name was Daniel Brooks. Most people knew him only as the janitor. He wore faded blue coveralls that had been patched more than once. His work shoes were old enough that the leather had begun to crack. Gray hair peeked from beneath a worn baseball cap, and every morning he greeted the security guards with the same gentle smile. "Morning, gentlemen." They always smiled back. "Morning, Mr. Brooks." Patients noticed him because he always slowed down long enough to hold an elevator door or carry a heavy bag. Children liked him because he folded paper towels into little birds while their parents filled out paperwork. Elderly visitors remembered him because he somehow knew exactly when someone needed a wheelchair before they asked. He never rushed. He never complained. He simply worked. Every corner he cleaned seemed to carry a little more peace than before. Nobody asked much about his life. Nobody wondered why someone in his 70s still worked 12-hour shifts pushing a mop through one of the city's most prestigious hospitals. To everyone else, he was invisible. Except to one person. Emily Carter. At 29 years old, Emily had quickly earned a reputation as one of the hospital's brightest young nurses. She was fast, confident, brilliant under pressure. Doctors praised her. Patients trusted her. She knew it. The admiration had slowly become something else. She began measuring people by their job titles. Surgeons deserved respect. Executives deserved attention. Maintenance workers barely deserved acknowledgement. And janitors, they were simply in the way. The first time Daniel crossed her path, she didn't even look at him. He had just finished polishing the emergency entrance when Emily hurried around the corner carrying a stack of patient files. Without slowing down, she barked, "Move." Daniel immediately stepped aside. "I'm sorry." She brushed past him with an exaggerated sigh. "If you cleaned faster, people wouldn't have to dodge you all day." Daniel simply nodded. "Have a wonderful morning." His kindness irritated her even more. Some people mistreated others because they enjoyed power. Emily did it because she had forgotten humility. Over the following weeks, it became routine. If Daniel was changing a trash bag, she complained he was blocking the hallway. If he was mopping, she walked directly across the wet floor, leaving muddy footprints behind without looking back. If he held the elevator, she stepped inside without thanking him. Other nurses noticed. Some looked uncomfortable. Others laughed quietly, eager to stay on Emily's good side. Daniel never reacted. Not once. He simply cleaned the footprints again. One rainy afternoon, a frightened little boy sat crying outside the pediatric ward while waiting for surgery. His stuffed bear had fallen apart. The stitching along one arm had completely unraveled. His mother searched helplessly through her purse. "I don't have a sewing kit." Daniel happened to be emptying a nearby trash bin. He disappeared for a few minutes. When he returned, he carried a tiny needle and thread from the maintenance office. He sat beside the little boy. "Carefully." patiently. He stitched every tear until the bear looked almost new. There, Daniel said with a warm smile. He'll keep protecting you. The little boy wrapped his arms around him. Thank you, Grandpa. His mother wiped away tears. You didn't have to do that. Daniel smiled softly. Sometimes the smallest repairs matter the most. Neither of them noticed Emily watching from the nurse's station. She rolled her eyes. Unbelievable, another nurse looked over. What? Emily shrugged. He spends more time pretending to be everyone's grandfather than doing his actual job. The words hung in the air, no one answered. Even the nurse standing beside her seemed uncomfortable. That afternoon, Daniel quietly finished cleaning the pediatric floor before anyone else noticed the muddy footprints, overflowing bins, or fingerprints on the glass doors. No announcements, no praise, no applause, just quiet service. Late that evening, after most employees had gone home, Daniel walked into an old storage room beneath the west wing. Inside sat a battered wooden cabinet. He unlocked it with a small brass key. Hidden behind stacks of cleaning supplies was a simple framed photograph, the hospital, nearly 40 years earlier. The building was barely half its current size. Standing in front of it was a much younger Daniel Brooks, wearing an expensive suit instead of coveralls. Beside him stood dozens of construction workers, all smiling proudly as they celebrated the opening of the hospital. Daniel brushed a thin layer of dust from the frame. A gentle smile crossed his face. So much has changed, he whispered. Footsteps echoed outside. He quietly returned the photograph to its place, locked the cabinet, and picked up his mop before anyone opened the door. To the rest of the staff, he was just the janitor finishing another shift. No one realized they had just walked past the man whose fingerprints were on every brick, every hallway, and every dream that had built the hospital from the ground up. And upstairs, Emily Carter had no idea that her cruelest words were bringing her closer to the most humiliating day of her life. The next morning, Daniel Brooks arrived before sunrise, just as he always did. The hospital was still wrapped in silence. The only sounds were the distant hum of air conditioning units, and the soft squeak of his mop gliding across the spotless floors. For Daniel, cleaning had never been just another job. Every polished hallway meant fewer infections. Every disinfected handrail meant one less opportunity for illness to spread. Every clean room meant a frightened patient could focus on healing instead of worrying about the environment around them. No task was beneath him. That belief had shaped his entire life. Unfortunately, not everyone shared it. Emily Carter walked into the emergency department carrying a fresh coffee and scrolling through messages on her phone. She barely glanced up before stopping in front of a wet floor, sign Daniel had carefully placed near the entrance. With a look of annoyance, she nudged the sign aside using the tip of her expensive shoe. Daniel noticed immediately. Miss Carter, he said gently, the floor is still wet, someone could slip. Emily didn't even slow down. Then dry it faster. She stepped directly across the freshly mopped floor, leaving a trail of muddy footprints behind her. Daniel quietly looked at the footprints. Then he smiled to himself. Without a single complaint, he filled his bucket again and began cleaning the floor for a second time. A young intern standing nearby frowned. You know, he said, you don't have to let people treat you like that. Daniel continued mopping. If someone else's attitude changes who I am, he replied softly, then I've given them something they never deserved. The intern stood speechless. Those words stayed with him long after Daniel walked away. Emily, however, seemed determined to push even further. As the days passed, her comments became sharper. Whenever she entered a room Daniel had just cleaned, she found something to criticize. You missed a spot. Trash should have been emptied 10 minutes ago. Honestly, I don't know how you still work here. The strange part was that Daniel's work was nearly flawless. Everyone knew it. Housekeeping supervisors trusted him with the most sensitive areas of the hospital because they knew he treated every room with extraordinary care. Yet Daniel never defended himself. He simply thanked people for their feedback and carried on. One afternoon, the hospital cafeteria became unusually crowded. Doctors, nurses, visitors, and support staff filled nearly every table. Daniel stood patiently in line with a simple bowl of soup and a sandwich. When he finally reached the cashier, he reached into his pocket. His wallet wasn't there. He searched every pocket twice. I'm sorry, he said with an embarrassed smile. I must have left it in the maintenance room. Before the cashier could respond, Emily laughed loudly enough for several nearby tables to hear. Maybe skip lunch today. Several people looked up. Emily shrugged. That'll save you money. An uncomfortable silence spread through the cafeteria. Daniel nodded politely. I'll come back later. As he turned to leave, an elderly patient sitting near the window slowly stood up. She had watched everything. Young man. Daniel turned. The woman walked over and placed a few bills on the cashier's counter. I'd like to pay for his lunch. Daniel immediately shook his head. That's very kind, but you don't have to. The woman smiled warmly. Oh yes, I do. She looked directly at Emily before continuing. This gentleman sat with my husband every afternoon during his final weeks. When none of us could be here, he made sure my husband never ate alone. Daniel lowered his eyes. It wasn't anything special. The woman's voice trembled. It meant everything to us. The cafeteria remained completely silent. Emily rolled her eyes, grabbed her coffee, and walked away. But not everyone followed. Several employees watched Daniel with a new kind of respect. Later that evening, Chief Surgeon Dr. Marcus Reynolds stepped into the hallway just as Daniel finished cleaning outside the intensive care unit. Mr. Brooks. Daniel smiled. Good evening, Doctor. Dr. Reynolds glanced around to make sure no one else was nearby. I've reviewed those documents. Daniel nodded. Thank you. They're exactly as you predicted. I expected they would be. The surgeon hesitated. Should I tell the board? Not yet. Dr. Reynolds gave a respectful nod. As you wish. Emily happened to turn the corner just as Dr. Reynolds walked away. She froze. One of the most respected surgeons in the entire hospital had just spoken to the janitor with unmistakable respect. Not politeness. Respect. She frowned. That didn't make sense. Curiosity lingered for only a moment before pride convinced her otherwise. He's probably just being nice to the old man, she thought. Nothing more. The following Friday, the hospital prepared for its annual charity gala. The event attracted wealthy donors, community leaders, and influential guests from across the state. Every department worked overtime to make the hospital look perfect. Daniel spent hours polishing the marble floors near the main lobby. As he worked, a sleek black luxury sedan pulled up outside the front entrance. The driver stepped out first. Then an elegantly dressed elderly woman emerged from the back seat. The moment she entered the lobby, her eyes searched the room. She ignored the administrators waiting to greet her. She walked past executives, past department heads, past members of the fundraising committee. She stopped directly in front of Daniel. A warm smile spread across her face. There you are. Daniel's expression softened. It's been too long. Without hesitation, the distinguished woman embraced him. Several employees stared in disbelief. One administrator hurried over. Mrs. Whitmore, he said nervously, the board is waiting for you upstairs. She didn't move. I'm aware. Instead, she looked at Daniel. I wouldn't have stepped into this building without greeting my oldest friend first. Daniel chuckled quietly. You always did enjoy making an entrance. Emily watched the entire exchange from across the lobby. She whispered to another nurse. Who is she? The nurse's eyes widened. That's Eleanor Whitmore. Emily blinked. The billionaire. The same one who donates millions to this hospital. Emily looked back at Daniel. Eleanor Whitmore was one of the hospital's largest benefactors. People waited months just to get 5 minutes with her. Yet she had walked past every executive, just to hug the janitor. For the first time, a small seed of doubt crept into Emily's mind. Maybe this old man wasn't as ordinary as everyone believed. She quickly pushed the thought away. No, there had to be another explanation. She had no idea that the explanation was far bigger than she could possibly imagine, and that the truth was already beginning to find its way into the open. Emily barely slept that night. The image kept replaying in her mind. Eleanor Whitmore, one of the state's most respected philanthropists. A woman whose donations had financed an entire pediatric wing. A woman who rarely stopped for anyone. Yet she had walked past the hospital's executives without hesitation. Just to embrace an elderly janitor. It didn't make sense. By Monday morning, curiosity had quietly replaced certainty. As she organized medication charts at the nurse's station, Emily casually turned to one of the senior nurses. How long has Daniel worked here? The nurse smiled. Longer than most of us have been alive. No, I mean before that. She shrugged. No one really knows, he doesn't talk much about himself. What about his family? I've never heard him mention one. Emily frowned. There had to be something. Everyone had a past. During her lunch break, she wandered into the hospital archives under the excuse of looking for old patient records. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with dusty binders, faded photographs, and decades of hospital history. An elderly records clerk noticed her searching. "Can I help you? I'm looking for information about one of the maintenance employees." The clerk adjusted his glasses. "Name: Daniel Brooks." The man paused. A strange expression crossed his face. "I haven't heard that name in years." Emily leaned forward. "You know him?" The clerk smiled faintly. "I knew of him. He disappeared into a back room and returned carrying a thick leather-bound album. Its edges were worn with age. This isn't supposed to leave the archive." Emily carefully opened the first page. Black and white photographs. Construction crews. Groundbreaking ceremonies. Architectural drawings. Doctors shaking hands. Then she froze. There, standing in the center of one photograph, was a much younger Daniel Brooks. Not in work clothes. Not holding him up. He wore a tailored suit. Beside him stood city officials, architects, and business leaders. Everyone seemed to be looking toward him. Emily's heartbeat quickened. "Who is this?" The clerk looked down at the photograph. "That's Daniel. But why is he standing with them?" The old man smiled. "Because none of this existed without him." Emily looked around the room. "What do you mean?" Before the clerk could answer, another employee entered the archive carrying a stack of files. The old man immediately closed the album. "I'm sorry." His voice became cautious. "Those records aren't available to staff." Emily left with more questions than answers. That afternoon, she found Daniel replacing a burned-out light bulb outside the oncology ward. He climbed down from the ladder slowly, smiling as always. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter." She hesitated. For the first time in months. She didn't insult him. Instead, she studied his face. The deep lines around his eyes. The calm expression. The quiet confidence that never seemed to disappear. "You've worked here a long time." Daniel nodded. "A lifetime. You must have seen this place change." "I've seen Bobbies become doctors." He smiled gently. "I've seen frightened medical students become remarkable surgeons." Emily folded her arms. "You seem proud of this hospital." Daniel looked down the hallway. "I love this place." There was something in his voice. Not pride. Not nostalgia. Something deeper. Almost like a father speaking about a child. Emily Carter would hear a name spoken with such reverence that every cruel word she had ever directed at the quiet old janitor would come rushing back to haunt her. The executive boardroom had never felt so tense. Outside the tall oak doors, department heads waited in quiet clusters, straightening ties, reviewing reports, and whispering final instructions to one another. Inside, every seat around the long mahogany table was occupied. Hospital executives, board members, legal advisors, major donors. At the head of the table sat Eleanor Whitmore. No one spoke above a whisper. Everyone seemed to be waiting for one person. The board chairman glanced at his watch. "He should be here." One executive frowned. "He's never late." The chairman smiled. "He never is." Downstairs, Daniel was finishing the last few strokes of his mop outside the oncology wing when his old flip phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. One simple message. "They're ready." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Before taking a single step toward the executive elevator, he noticed something else. A young nurse was struggling to calm an elderly patient who had become confused and frightened after waking from surgery. Doctors hurried past. Visitors looked away. Daniel quietly walked over. He knelt beside the man's wheelchair. "It's all right, Mr. Harris." The elderly man looked around in panic. I can't find my wife." Daniel rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You told me yesterday she's waiting at home for you." The man's breathing slowly steadied. She is. Daniel smiled. And she asked me to remind you not to argue with the nurses. A small laugh escaped the old man's lips. That sounds like her. The frightened expression disappeared. The nurse looked at Daniel with grateful eyes. Thank you. Daniel simply nodded. We all need someone to help us remember who we are. Only after making sure Mr. Harris was comfortable did Daniel walk toward the executive elevators. Emily noticed. She had watched the entire exchange from the nurse's station. Once again, the janitor had done what no one else had taken the time to do. And once again, he asked for nothing in return. Something inside her became increasingly uncomfortable. The image she had built of Daniel no longer matched reality. Still, pride refused to surrender. The executive elevator doors opened. Daniel stepped inside alone. Employees passing through the lobby barely looked at him. To them, he was simply the janitor cleaning another floor. When the elevator reached the top level, the chairman himself stood waiting. The moment Daniel stepped out, the chairman extended his hand. Good afternoon, Mr. Brooks. Daniel smiled warmly. Good afternoon, Richard. The chairman laughed. You still insist on calling me by my first name. I've known you since you were 26. I suppose you've earned the right. They walked together toward the boardroom. Every executive they passed greeted Daniel with quiet respect. Some stood. Others nodded. A few even thanked him for coming. From the far end of the hallway, Emily had just delivered patient files to the administrative office. She froze. The hospital chairman, walking beside the janitor. Like an equal. Her pulse quickened. Without thinking, she quietly followed them. Inside the boardroom, every conversation stopped. Every person rose to their feet. Not for the chairman. For Daniel. No announcement had been made. No instruction had been given. Respect alone had moved the room. Daniel acknowledged them with a humble nod. Please. Sit down. He remained standing. The chairman turned toward the room. For 41 years, one man has asked for no recognition. He paused. He believed that if this hospital ever became more concerned with names than with patients, it would lose the very reason it was built. Silence filled the room. The chairman continued. Many of our newer employees know him only as Daniel, the janitor. Several executives smiled knowingly. Others lowered their eyes. But before any of us held these positions, he looked toward Daniel. This hospital existed because one man refused to let an underserved community go without quality medical care. The chairman picked up an old framed photograph. The same photograph Emily had seen in the archives. Only now it was larger. Clearer. Impossible to misunderstand. It showed a young Daniel Brooks holding blueprints beside the original construction site. The chairman's voice became emotional. Founder. The room remained silent. Builder. Another pause. Majority owner. The words landed like thunder. And the man who quietly transferred nearly every operational decision to this board so that the hospital would never become centered around one individual. Daniel lowered his eyes. It was never about me, outside the slightly open boardroom door. Emily's knees nearly gave way. Founder. Owner. The article. The photograph. Eleanor Whitmore. The executives. Everything suddenly fit together. Every insult. Every sarcastic remark. Every cruel laugh. Every muddy footprint she had intentionally left on his freshly cleaned floors. A wave of shame crashed over her so powerfully that she could barely breathe. Inside, Eleanor Whitmore stood. When Daniel built this hospital, investors wanted private luxury suites. She smiled softly. He insisted the first expansion be a children's ward. Several board members nodded. When costs increased, she continued. He sold properties that would be worth hundreds of millions today. The room fell silent again. He chose children over wealth. Daniel gently interrupted. I simply chose what mattered. The chairman opened another folder. There is one final matter. His expression became serious. Over the past several months, Mr. Brooks has personally observed behavior throughout this hospital while working anonymously among every department. Several executives exchanged glances. The purpose was simple. He looked around the room to discover whether our culture still reflects the values upon which this institution was built. The room became perfectly still. Daniel slowly looked toward the door, toward the hallway, toward Emily. Their eyes met. For the first time since she had known him. He did not smile. He wasn't angry. He wasn't seeking revenge. There was only sadness. The kind of sadness that comes when someone has every opportunity to choose kindness and repeatedly chooses something else. Emily felt tears fill her eyes. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to undo months of cruelty. But there are moments in life when words arrive far too late. And deep inside, she knew this was one of them. As Daniel quietly walked toward the doorway, every heartbeat seemed louder than the last. He stopped only a few feet from her. The hallway had gone completely silent. Doctors, nurses, administrators. Everyone was watching. No one knew what he was about to say. And neither did Emily. She could only stand there, trembling, realizing that the quiet janitor she had mocked every single day had never needed to prove who he was. Now, the entire hospital was about to discover who everyone else had become. No one spoke. The hallway felt suspended in time. Doctors who had once hurried past Daniel stood shoulder to shoulder with nurses, interns, administrators, and patients. Every eye was fixed on the elderly man in the faded blue coveralls. Emily Carter couldn't lift her head. Her hands trembled. For the first time in her career, she wasn't afraid of losing her reputation. She was ashamed of earning it the way she had. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was as calm as it had always been. "Miss Carter." She slowly looked up, tears already running down her face. I'm so sorry." Her words came out broken. "I don't even know where to begin." Daniel nodded gently. "Then begin with the truth." Emily swallowed hard. "I judged you." She took a shaky breath. "I looked at your uniform and decided your worth." Another tear rolled down her cheek. "I thought being respected meant having an important title." Her voice cracked. "I forgot that every person in this hospital matters." The hallway remained completely silent. Daniel's expression softened. "Do you know why I chose to wear this uniform?" Emily slowly shook her head. "When we opened this hospital 41 years ago, I promised myself something." He glanced down at the mop still resting in his hand. "I promised that if I ever became too important to clean the floor beneath a patient's bed, I had become too important to lead." No one moved. Several doctors lowered their eyes. A young intern quietly wiped away a tear. Daniel continued. "Leadership isn't measured by the office you occupy. It's measured by the people who feel safer because you walked into the room." The words settled over the crowd like a quiet wave. He looked around the hallway. This hospital was never built to impress wealthy donors. He smiled at Alina Whitmore. "Though we're grateful for every one of them." A few people laughed softly through their tears. "It was built so that no child would be turned away because their parents couldn't afford care. So an elderly man wouldn't have to choose between medicine and groceries. So frightened families could find hope on the worst day of their lives." He paused. "Every job in this building serves that mission." He looked toward the environmental services staff gathered near the elevators. "The people who disinfect these rooms save lives." Toward security. "The officers who keep families safe save lives." Toward reception. "The employees who greet scared patients with kindness save lives." Then toward the physicians. "And doctors save lives." He smiled. "But none of us can do it alone." For the first time, Emily truly understood. The hospital had never been divided by titles. Only by the way people chose to see one another. Daniel turned toward the chairman. "I've finished my evaluation." The chairman nodded. "What is your recommendation?" Everyone held their breath. Daniel looked once more at Emily. "I recommend additional leadership training for every department." Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Daniel continued. Respect cannot be mandatory. It must become our culture. The chairman smiled. It will be done. Emily blinked in disbelief. He wasn't asking for her dismissal. He wasn't demanding revenge. He was giving the hospital an opportunity to become better. She stepped forward. No. Every head turned toward her. She wiped away her tears. I need to earn another chance. She faced the chairman. I accept whatever disciplinary action the board believes is appropriate. Then she turned back to Daniel. But whether I remain here or not. Thank you for showing me the person I had become. Daniel nodded quietly. The hardest mirror to face is the one that tells the truth. Weeks later, the hospital announced a new initiative. Every new employee, from surgeons to volunteers, would spend one full day working alongside environmental services, food service, maintenance, reception, and patient transport before beginning their regular duties. Not as punishment. As perspective. The program became known simply as the Brooks Standard. Its purpose was simple. Before learning how to treat patients, learn how to treat people. Emily remained at the hospital. Not because anyone ignored her behavior, but because she accepted responsibility for it. She apologized personally to every member of the environmental services team. Some accepted immediately. Others needed time. She understood. Trust isn't restored with words. It's rebuilt through consistent actions. Months passed. The nurses who once laughed with her noticed something different. She thanked housekeepers by name. She carried meal trays when the cafeteria became overwhelmed. She stayed after shifts to help transport patients. When someone left muddy footprints across a freshly cleaned hallway, she quietly found them up herself. Daniel never mentioned the past again. He didn't need to. One rainy afternoon, he walked through the pediatric wing and smiled as he watched children filling the playroom with laughter. Emily approached him carrying 2 cups of coffee. I remembered. Daniel looked at her curiously. You take yours with 1 sugar. He chuckled. You've been paying attention. I've been trying. They sat together by a large window overlooking the hospital gardens. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Emily asked quietly, why didn't you ever tell anyone who you were? Daniel looked outside. A little boy was helping another child push a wheelchair through the garden path. He smiled. If people are only kind because they know your name, they were never truly kind. Emily nodded slowly. Those words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Years later, when Daniel Brooks peacefully retired, the hospital held a ceremony unlike any in its history. Doctors stood beside janitors. Executives stood beside cafeteria workers. Surgeons applauded alongside receptionists. Not because they were honoring the richest man in the room, but because they were honoring the humblest. As Daniel prepared to leave the stage, the audience rose together. The applause continued for several minutes. Not loud. Not dramatic. Steady. Heartfelt. The kind of applause reserved for someone who had changed lives without asking anyone to notice. Before walking away, Daniel offered one final piece of advice. Never confuse someone's position with their value. You'll meet extraordinary people wearing ordinary uniforms. Then he smiled the same quiet smile that had greeted every sunrise for more than 4 decades. And he walked out of the hospital exactly as he had entered it thousands of mornings before. Not as a billionaire. Not as an owner. Not even as a founder. But as a man who believed that no act of honest service is ever beneath a person of true character. Long after his footsteps faded down the hallway, his legacy remained. Not in the marble walls. Not in the boardroom. Not in the fortune he had quietly given away. His legacy lived in every employee who finally understood that the strongest hospitals are not built by the people with the highest titles. They are built by the people who choose kindness when no one is watching. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. The world rarely reveals a person's true worth through the clothes they wear or the job they hold. It reveals it through the lives they quietly make better, one small act at a time. If Daniel Brooks' story moved you, share this video with someone who believes that a person's value is measured by their job title. Sometimes, one story can change the way we treat the people we meet every day. And if you enjoy deeply emotional, cinematic stories with powerful life lessons, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. A new story is waiting for you, and it might just become the one you'll never forget. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.